In this module, we're addressing standards, assessment, and high-stakes testing. First question we need to ask is, why do we test students? Well, your text mentions 4 different reasons why we might want to test students. The first is to diagnose individual student needs. What is it that's unique about this student? Why are they having difficulties in some areas, or why are they performing really well in some areas? Where are they in the scope and sequence of the skills that we're trying to teach? So each of these might be a reason for testing individual students to kind of diagnose where they are and where we need to be working with them. The second reason that we test students is to inform instruction. When we teach a lesson to our students, we need some way to know whether or not our teaching was successful. And the way to determine whether our teaching is successful is by determining whether or not students have learned the information that we've presented to them. If we present material to them and they don't learn, we haven't really taught. We've simply presented material. And of course our goal is to teach. So testing can help us determine whether or not that's taking place. A third reason that we test students is to evaluate programs. Am I being successful in my class? Are the programs that I'm using in my class being successful so that students are learning? Or perhaps it's a program that we're utilizing on our campus. Maybe we have a new program we've instituted this year. Is it being successful? Or it can be school-wide. How well is our school doing? Is our district doing? How well is the state doing? How well is our nation doing? So each of these are ways that we sometimes evaluate programs to determine if we're being successful. And then the last reason why we test students is to provide accountability information. How much have students grown? Have we met the goals that we've had for the students in our classrooms for this coming year? In learner-centered classrooms, it's important for teachers to first assess to establish what students know and do not know, and then plan instruction based on this information. So in this situation, what we're actually saying is that the assessment drives instruction. We pre-test students before we teach to determine what they know, and this helps us understand where we need to begin in our lesson, how much rigor we need to have in our lesson, or whether our lesson is going to be too difficult for them and maybe we need to add some scaffolding. So each of these things are elements of things that we can get, or information that we can get by pre-testing our students before instruction, and this will again inform our instruction. Every assessment that you give needs to have these qualities. First of all, it needs to be tied to your stance on learning or your philosophy. Think about what you believe about learning and how students learn, and that should impact assessments that you design and deliver to your students. Second, they should be driven by learning goals or standards. In Texas, our standards are the texts, and so we want to see what texts have we covered, or what texts do we need to cover for the students in our classrooms. So those texts should guide our learning. The third is it should be systematic, and that means it should be valid. It actually measures what we think it's measuring, and it should be reliable. And that means that we get about the same score every time we give it to the same student. We don't give it one day and have a score of 12, and the next day we give it and have a score of 4. It should be reliable, and it should give us reliable results each time we give it. The fourth one is it should be tied to instruction. We never, ever want to test students over information that they haven't been introduced to yet, unless it's a pre-assessment. The next is it should be inclusive of the learner. That means we should differentiate that test so that we're looking at different ways of assessing the same thing, so that students that learn different ways are being fairly assessed, that we're not using just one method to assess students, and so students who don't learn that way don't get a fair assessment. And finally, we need to integrate our assessment into a manageable system. We don't want to spend so much time on assessment that we don't have time to have instruction in our classroom. One type of assessment is informal assessment. An informal assessment is valuable to assess students' progress in learning through the unit. As I'm teaching each day, I'm going to be asking questions or asking students to perform some type of activity so that I know that they're with me and they're learning or they're getting what I'm doing. If I wait until I've taught the whole lesson before I do any assessment, I may have wasted valuable time in my classroom because the students aren't learning what I think that they're learning. Usually informal assessments are not paper-pencil tests. They could be oral, they could be demonstration, they could be discussion, but usually not a paper-pencil quiz. And they're important because they help keep us as teachers on track and help us to continually evaluate our students' comprehension and understanding of whatever it is we're hoping that they're going to learn. Another type of testing is formal assessment or high-stakes tests. And formal assessments are different from informal assessments in that they're standardized. And they usually have significant reward or consequences attached to them. And currently, they're a huge part of the educational landscape in our classrooms. We all know about the TAKS test or the STAR test and how students' results for those tests are plastered on the front pages of the newspapers and on television, and the media is very much interested in how students do on those tests. And it's important to us as teachers because the success of our students is a reflection of our teaching, and so we want them to do well. Unfortunately, it's one of the key elements of high-stakes testing is motivating students to do well. It's not something we normally give a grade for in our classroom, and so sometimes students don't see the value in doing their very best on these assessments. And so it's important that we help nurture the atmosphere that these tests are important. We have to help the students have the perception and the attitude and a positive disposition towards the test. One of the ways that we can do this is through helping them understand that it's their chance to show how much they know, and it's their chance to show what they can do, and it's not a chance that they get again. They only get that chance once a year, so it's important that they do a very, very good job on it. Also, it's essential that all school community members, especially the faculty, see the test as worthwhile, important, and achievable. And that means that we've prepared our students adequately and we've prepared our faculty adequately to get our students ready to be successful on these tests. To create a positive and successful testing climate, the entire school should address the following things. First of all, test format practice. You want to use the same format as is used in the test throughout the school year so that when it comes time for the real test, that students aren't surprised by its format or confused by its format. It should be something that they're very comfortable with on a regular basis. Also, Also, it means that the school should have adopted some instructional reading strategies to help students be successful on the test, and they've trained their students in how to use those reading strategies. And the students have been using them all year long, so again, it's not something new to them, but it's something they're very comfortable and proficient at using. And finally, the student engagement in reading. If you go all year long and don't expect your children to read independently, how do you think that they're going to read independently on the test and be successful? So we need to teach our students how to read and be successful in reading independently, and we also need to build up their ability to read for long periods of time, their stamina as readers, so that when they have to take a test that lasts several hours, they don't get fatigued and just quit working. For test format practice, some of the things that we do are infuse test practice into the curriculum. Is it connected to good general learning, and does it connect with effective literacy strategies? So we need to first of all foster a test-wise attitude. We're all going to do our very best on this test. We're going to support each other, and we're going to provide a climate that's conducive to taking a test. We're not going to talk when we finish. We're not going to distract other students. We're going to take the job seriously and do our very best work. On page 169 in your test, it talks about some general test-wise skills. And be sure you go back and review those because they're important as well. Also, we need to teach kids the direction words, and those examples are also listed in your text on page 170 and 171. It's important that they know and understand and are comfortable using those direction words so that they follow the directions correctly on the test. There's nothing more frustrating than giving a standardized test and realizing that your students didn't understand the instructions that were there. Your text on page 171 also gives you a checklist on how to work with multiple choice questions, and also on 174 talks about some skills for reading passages. Be sure that you go back and look at each of those sections because they are very important. A lot of the skills, reading strategies that are necessary to do well on standardized tests are the same ones that we've been talking about throughout the course this semester. When teachers begin to use those strategies that we've been talking about all year long in order to boost learning in their classroom, they're also helping prepare students to do a much better job on testing. And we need to teach students, most importantly, how to transport the set of strategies that they're learning in our class to new situations, such as the testing situation. The use of a set of strategies for teaching reading for information can serve the dual function of good instruction and effective preparation for standardized testing. So when teachers say, oh, I don't have time to deal with the test, I've got too much to teach, we do both of them at the same time if we're doing a good job and utilizing our time well in our classroom. Again, much like I mentioned before, if students are going to be better test takers, we have to encourage them to read more. And they have to be encouraged to read in every classroom, not just in their language arts classroom. They need to be reading science. They need to be reading social studies. They need to be reading math, because if they can't read your content area, they're not going to do well in your content area on the test. So that's why it's so essential that content area teachers know how to teach reading and writing in their content area.